So this is one of those videos where everything comes together. So if you've paid attention into the shader theory and the MAHS theory and the array theory, this is where all that's going to come together, because I'm going to tell you guys as much as possible what all those nerd knobs in the MAHS shader do. There's so many settings in there that you can tweak, and I'm going to do my best to explain them. And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure what all of them do myself. But the best way is to experiment, and I'm going to show you how to experiment safely so you don't mess anything up. So let's go into Unity. Now, when I say experiment safely, this is what I mean. So I've got my fairway highlighted here, and I selected. And what we have on this is our OPCD MAHS fairway default material right here, okay? Now, if we go in here and we go down to the shader, and this is the area that we're going to be concerning ourselves with, and there are all these settings down here, tons of them, right? It's tons of stuff that we can tweak and play with. And if I start changing this and we don't change them back, we can easily get to a state where it's hard to get back to a known good, which is the default, okay? How this is set up right now. So the safe way to play here is to take this material, this OPCD MAHS default fairway, and I can go down to it and I can go to Control D. And when I do that, I'm going to get a new material here called default one. So I could either leave it that, or I could say, I'm going to say default one, I'm going to say default demo instead. And now with this material, I can come back to this fairway and I can drag this up and drop it into the material slot here. And then remember, when we do that, we want to do update materials, because that's going to update any blends associated with this as well. So now I've got a different material that is a copy of the original. And if I make changes to this and I do something really bad that I can't remember how to fix, I still have the original fairway default in here that I can revert back to by dragging it into the slot. Okay, so now we're able to play safely. If it turns out I do something really good on this, I can just use it in my other meshes, or I can put it in my set mesh material slot so that the default for my other fairways is this new one that I'm playing with right now. So let's get started. So if I come down here into my MAHS fairway default demo, then this is, selecting my shader, which is our MAHS shader, and I can start going down through here in a bunch of these settings. Now, the stuff at the top here, you really don't need to concern yourself. Well, it's our terrain size, which we set in the set mesh materials. We're probably not going to touch our offset X or Y. Slope shading though, and you're not going to really see the effect of slope shading. It looks like it's just making things a little bit darker, but slope shading is more effective on a terrain that has a lot of changes to the terrain. It's going to almost give an artificial shadowing effect to give more depth. And for example, a green that undulates, it's going to get a little bit more depth. So you can play with these and see what looks good, but that's about the extent of my explanation for those at this point. Now, we already talked about the input texture, so there's where our base, detail, and normal arrays are defined, and our satellite is also defined here, which we did in our set mesh. Now, farther down, we've got these height textures, which are a little bit more advanced than what we're going through here right now, but height textures will give additional options as far as when we do blends to give this more detailed bumpiness, to a certain area. Now our fairway, all these are the same because the height textures are really just this grass-like material. Now going down here into the channel setup, texture setup, let's start with red. And I'm going to tell you right now that red is exactly as green, is exactly as blue, and exactly as black as you see. So I'm just going to work on the red channel because this right now is all red channel. So if I came up here and do my show vertex painting, it's all red. So the only thing right now, because it's all red, that's going to be impacted is if I come down here and make changes to the red channel. However, everything I'm explaining right now holds true for the green, blue, black. We talked a little bit about those, that they're calling different indexes in the arrays, so they look differently. But what I'm talking about right now is specifically to the red, but it applies to everything else. So use satellite for base. If I check this, instead of using the base that is assigned via the base array, which is index number 2 here, it'll pull in my satellite image instead. This is used for sat shading, okay? An advanced topic later on in the course will cover sat shading, but just know that if you turn that on, you have now taken your base array out and replaced it with the sat image, which is in this slot right now. So you're no longer using the base texture, you're using the satellite as your base, just so you know. So let's read that check. Red base index we covered before. This is calling the texture in the base array, and it is 2 in this case. And if I uncheck this, essentially we turn that off. So we're not using that base at all, and we are left with our detail and surface tiling. Say more details on those in a second. This comes in handy if you want to really understand what the detail is doing. So let's just leave that off for now. And so we have our red detail index, which I explained in the previous video. So this is calling red detail index slot 0. So then slot 1 would be our MAHS. Our opacity controls how much we can see through our detail textures and see our base. So right now, if I move this, it doesn't look like anything's happening. Well, that's because we don't have any base enabled. So I'm going to turn my base back on. And if I slide this up and down, you can see that if I slide this all the way up, we can't see through our detail textures. So that's all we're seeing right now because they're completely opaque. And if we turn it down, we see completely through them and we see our base texture and we see our surface tiling as well. So we'll talk about surface tiling a little bit. So let me put this back up to about where I think it should be. Our red detail distance controls how far away we can see our detail texture. So if I back, that says 5,000, which is 5,000 meters. Now, if I change this to 10, you can see now that I look down here and I only see, okay, basically my base and my surface tiling. But if I scroll in close, when I get to about 10 meters, right here, and hopefully you can see it in the video, our detail tiling, our detail textures start to pop in. So up close, I do see the detail, but out there, I do not see the detail textures. And so that is what this detail distance controls. So let me change this back to 5,000, and you'll see that this will fill all the way out. So back to 5,000, we're seeing the detail all the way out. All these things require a little bit of an eye and what your intent is, and experience will get you there. I really can't tell you the best. I would say if you don't know, stick to the defaults. Otherwise, it requires a little bit of detail. Now, the red detail fall off controls how quickly, if we go back to, let's say, 15 meters, and you can see we have our detail is fully being seen here, and then it starts to taper off. This red detail fall off determines how quickly it falls off. So if I put this, it's really hard for you guys to see, but if I put this all the way down, you can see the detail falls off rather slowly. And if I put this all the way here, it falls off rather quickly. Okay, it's the amount of change. This is the normal blend distance and normal blend fall off. So it depends how far we're going to see our blends and our normals. So the distance for our normal here is 12. So that means outside of 12, we won't see the normal. What does that normal do? Well, it controls that bumpiness, okay? And the same thing with that fall off. This is a hard one to see if you're not used to what you're looking for. Now, same thing for green, blue, black, okay? Same settings. We're just controlling a different channel, but we don't have green, blue, or black currently present in this. But if we painted up vert painted, we would see these. Channel blends, we talked about that with blending and how channel blends associate or impact blends, so we're not going to go over this anymore. This next 4 sections for the red, green, blue channel essentially just are overall color changes in this. So I could click on this and I can essentially make this overall just darken it, or I could lighten it. I could also make it red if I want. I can make it orange if I want. I can make it green. For the most part, you got to be careful about using this because it's a very drastic change, okay? And then we got the same thing for the other channels, and we can also control the strength. Higher strength is going to make this, essentially black. Those aren't things that I really tweak too much or I touch very often. Very careful with those. Then we got the channel details. Okay, so this is going to impact the uh, more or less the details in the base. So this one, the red base color tint, is going to change the tint or the color of our base texture. In this case, it is slightly green, but you can see if I move this over, it's going to make our base even greener, highly saturated. And if I move that back, I can remove a lot of the color and go strictly, if this is all the way to the left, it's strictly using the color from the base. Okay, I'm going to Control Z and bring that back to where it was before. This is really annoying that I keep on popping up here. Our tiling. So tiling is something that's important to understand. You know that a texture is a square. Tiling controls how big those squares are when they're placed inside of our mesh. So this 200 is going to make much more sense. I think you'll be able to see it. If I change that to 2, it's hard to see. But with 2, our tiling is much bigger. And with 200, our tiling is much smaller. I'll be able to see this, I think, with surface opacity here in a second. Red detail to saturate, which is going to take the saturation, it's going to take our base and make it basically a dull color. So you can see that. Red detail color tint. So this is going to change the color of our detail texture. Remember the first one, that first texture, what we're calling from the detail array, what's going to change the texture or the coloring of that texture. So I could actually change that. So this is not changing the base array color, it's changing the detail texture color. And I scrolled up again. Let's see here. Normal strength, so we've talked about, remember the normal texture? Well, this controls how strong it is. So if I do that, it increases the bumpiness almost to the point now where we're getting almost these artificial shadows. So just be careful how much you get. It gives it that grainy look. I'm going to put that back to where it was. Controls our far tiling and our near tiling. So if I back away, I can control the tiling for our normal and the normal strength from far away. So from far away, I can turn up our normal strength. So from far away, what our normals look like. Let me turn that back down. Now, mow lines. This is going to be very interesting and important for you guys. One of the most powerful functions here, which is I can do the red mow line tiling, which is if I change this to 0, gets rid of mow lines altogether because they're not being tiled at all. Changing this to 35 puts them back big, but you can tell now if I change this to 1, our mow lines are going to be extremely, extremely small. So I can use this to adjust how big our mow lines are. So if I change to something like 60, huge mow lines, and I can change it back to 35 for that size mow lines. Now, if I check this box, this goes back to our theory of remember that mow lines in the base array are in slot 1, and it was a packed texture, which means it has several different channels to it. Well, this channel, if I enable mow line vert cross, it enables another channel that'll make those mow lines cross. Now, I know it's hard to see here, but if I turn up my mow line opacity, it's going to make those stronger. Now you can see that I've got a cross pattern. So if I turn that all the way up, it gets rather ugly, but you can see now I have a cross pattern associated with my mow line simply by enabling that checkbox, which enables another channel in that packed texture. Let me turn that off because I don't want cross, and let me turn my opacity back down to make it look a little bit more realistic. Actually, I'm going to turn that back up because our next slot here is yet another channel in that mow line packed texture, which enables aging, which makes our mow lines look a little older. So you can see when I do that, my mow lines actually get a little bit of a different fade to them. And I can turn this opacity down, and what it does, it just ages our mow lines. And if I can combine these together, I can get crossed aged mow lines. Okay, so let me turn those back off again. I can mess with the rotation of my mow line. So if I don't like how they're going up and down the fairway this way, I can change them so that they're going sideways by changing the rotation. So now it's going across the fairway versus up and down the fairway. I can also move them right to left. So this is a hard one to see, but you can tell I'm moving the fairways to the right and to the left here. That's the offset. Um, Red surface tiling. I talked about surface tiling, which gives this more, it breaks up some of the opacity, gives it some randomness in our shader. So if I change the surface opacity, you'll be able to see this. So I'm going to turn this way up, and you can see that the surface opacity is this, I want to call it blotchy texture that gives us a little bit randomization and confusion. So things don't look so, I would say, structured inside of our textures. So let me turn that back down so it blends in a little bit more. And then we can change the brightness of that as well. So if I turn that all the way up, and if I turn this all the way up, you'll really see what that surface opacity looks like. So it's adding confusion to make things look a little bit more random. And then we have our AO brightness, which is, this is a very tough one to see, but that's our part of the MAHS shader, the A part of that. It's our AO brightness. And our red smoothness, which is the reflection. I always keep this down to 0. And most things you want to do in golf courses and golf building, including your trees, you want to keep the smoothness down pretty low. So that is a lot of the nerd knobs in here. What I would recommend you do is, again, copy that material and replace it in one fairway and have fun. That way, when you're done and you really messed everything up like I did, I can come back, I can grab my original fairway material, drop it in here, and I can see how mad I messed this up by letting this go. So that's back to the original, and no harm, no foul. I'll do an update materials, so that updates my uh, scripting object here, and hopefully you get to play with those and have some fun with the MAHS shader.